Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today for the Internet of Waters webinar on 7 years of DataStream, left turns, lessons learned, and the open data road ahead. I love that title, by the way. It's a great title. So today we welcome our friends Carolyn Dubois and Lindsay Day, who are going to talk to us about DataStream. But before we do so, a few items of housekeeping. Just want to remind everybody that the webinar today is being recorded. After the webinar ends, in the coming days, we will post the video to the webinar to our website, and we will also post the slides that you'll see the presenters use today. If you registered for the webinar, you'll get the link in the slides sent to you via email. Also wanted to just let you know how you can interact with us today. If you're having technical difficulties, please be sure to message in the chat function. We have our staff here are going to help walk you through any problems you may have. However, if you have a question for the panelists today, we're going to ask that you use the Q&A function. We will address any questions that are in the Q&A at the end of the presentation. So we'll get, if you don't hear us ask your question, that's because we're going to wait to the very end. We also want to ask that you stick around at the end to complete a survey that'll come up on your screen that lets us know what you think about the webinar and give us any good feedback. And then finally, I just want to let you know about our next upcoming webinar happening on Tuesday, March 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Our friends at WADE, the Water Data Exchange from the Western States Water Council, will be presenting on WSTAT, their Western States Water Data Access and Analysis Tool. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our two presenters today. Carolyn is the Executive Director of the Water Program at the Gordon Foundation. Her work is focused on improving freshwater stewardship through citizen engagement and decision-making and the use of the best available evidence. She's particularly passionate advocate for open data and has led the development of DataStream. So we really appreciate Carolyn giving us her time. Lindsay is the program director for DataStream, and in this role, she works with communities, governments, researchers, and other collaborators to continually grow and improve DataStream. And so I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I'm going to let Carolyn and Lindsay share their screens. Take it away.
Great. Well, just a big thank you to the Internet of Water for hosting us today. We've been watching your webinars and following your work and really have loved the webinar. So we hope that everyone will enjoy this too. And thanks everyone who's tuning in today. So I'm Carolyn Dubois and I am based in Toronto. And Toronto sits on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people.
And I'm Lindsay. I'm calling in today from Wilno, Ontario in the Madawaska Valley on unceded Algonquin territory.
All right, so we'll just jump in. So during our presentation today, we wanted to introduce people to DataStream because we imagine that many of you aren't familiar with our work. So we're going to do sort of like a DataStream 101. But this is not going to be a deep dive into the inner workings of the system. Instead, sort of our main focus is going to be to talk about sort of our programming generally. It's been 7 years since the first DataStream hub launched, and we've really learned a lot over these years. And we're actually in the midst of an external evaluation of our programming. So we're in this kind of reflective mode, and we thought we'd share this headspace and some of the thinking with you all today. So we'll start with some of the early days and some of the aha moments we had then. And then we'll focus on some of the growing pains we've experienced and some of the game changers along the way. And then we'll shift to sort of future looking and what we're excited for down the road. So in terms of what DataStream is, so in a nutshell, DataStream is an open access site for water quality data. It's absolutely free and open for anyone to use. And it's designed to minimize common barriers to accessing and sharing data. And we look to foster connections and collaboration and trust among, a broad range of organizations, so across sectors, across watersheds. And finally, we're committed to continuous improvement. So we always say, what you see online today is not necessarily what you'll see tomorrow. We are quite literally, always working on improving the platform, actually working on it, as I speak today. So I think the best way to get to know DataStream is to actually see it. So Lindsay is going to provide a mini demo of the site to give you a sense of what it is.
And this really is going to be a quick tour, demo light. As Carolyn mentioned, we have different DataStream hubs that are regional platforms. So this is Great Lakes DataStream. You can see here our map-based interface. All those circles and dots represent monitoring locations that are on the site. So you're able to search through by areas of interest. We also have some filters. So you can filter, you can see a list of all the data sets on the system. You can filter by organization. So all the different organizations that are contributing data, as well as by a parameter of interest or by region. And so I'll just take us into a data set so you can see what that looks like. Thought I'd show you Niagara River watershed, which is Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper data. This is actually brought in, we'll speak to this a little bit later, through an automated integration that we have just started working on with Water Reporter. So here you see, this is a list of all the locations on the left, and you can add and remove them. You can also toggle to the map and see where there are and add and remove them there as well. For all the data set metadata information, so who collected it, abstract, we also have DOI links. You can view that on the left panel as well. If you scroll over the dots, so we're plotting temperature right now. And if you scroll over, you can see more details on the location and the actual result. And then you can plot anything that is measured in this data set. So where aquatic ecosystem guidelines exist, we automatically plot those as well. So that can be pretty helpful just in getting an overview of where the results are falling within that. And as a Canadian platform, we plot CCME, but we also have the US EPA guidelines as well that can be added to the visualization tool. We really aim to make the platform as accessible as possible to a wide audience. So we have developed some science explainer material for some of the most commonly measured parameters. So explaining, what it is, why does it matter, and how it's measured. You can also download summary statistics or the entire data set or the selected locations that you have chosen. And I'm not going to demo it today, but you can also use our custom download tool to do a more customized query of the database to seek out the data that you're looking for. So I'll leave it there. That's just to give you a bit of a sense of what the platform looks like. And I will just queue up our slides again for Carolyn. Sorry, Zoom windows are in the way. There we go.
That's muted. Great. Okay, so I'm going to sort of walk you through some of the early years of DataStream development, and I promise this isn't going to be like ancient history and lore of the platform, but we wanted to share this period because a lot of the decisions and a lot of the lessons that we learned early on have kind of since become principles about how we operate the platform, and they've really influenced just decisions that we're making sort of day to day. So to start off, DataStream was born out of a collaboration with the government of the Northwest Territories. So this is between the Gordon Foundation and the government of the Northwest Territories. And just for some context on the Gordon Foundation. So the foundation is a private foundation that for decades has focused on water policy, among other issues. And though we have a diversity of programs, we like to say that the common thread through everything that we do is to find ways to involve people in the decisions that affect them. So it was really this spirit that had us sort of do something kind of radically different, really, in building a data system, which this was very new for the foundation, but it really was along those lines of involving people in decision making. So how did we come to this? So about a decade ago, we were interested in working in the Mackenzie Basin that's pictured here. So that's a basin that flows from Alberta in the south north through provinces and territories and indigenous territories to the Arctic Ocean. And we were thinking, what can we do in terms of how can we contribute to freshwater management and protection in this part of the country? So we did some scoping work, and what we learned from that surprised us. What we learned was that it was surprisingly difficult to get your hands on data that could tell you about the health of the basin. And that's surprising for a number of reasons, including the fact that there's quite a lot of, there's in parts of the basin, there's quite a lot of development, so also a lot of associated science, and yet we couldn't answer some basic questions. The second thing we learned was that a lot of Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities were out taking to their local waterways and wanting to answer their own questions around freshwater health. So they were actively monitoring within the basin. And so this monitoring included a really, really neat program that's still operating and very, very successful today. So this is a program that brings 21 communities together from across the Northwest Territories to monitor freshwater health. And this isn't just sort of like 5 or 6 parameters, they're measuring like 70 plus parameters, and all this data is comparable. So from the south all the way up to the Arctic Ocean. And we thought, okay, this is a really cool opportunity. How can we help support it? So we partnered with the government of the Northwest Territories and started working on a solution. So I have to say, so this is kind of where the lessons came in. In the first couple of years, we spent a lot of time sort of figuring out, like, what are we actually going to do? This was a really exciting time of blue skying, but it was also a hard time where we had to make hard decisions around focus. So we spent a lot of time talking about things like data ownership, what data could be shared, what tools could we build. There was a huge interest from a lot of different groups, including the community-based monitoring groups, in this idea of building a data management system, and a lot of big ideas as well. So, quite rightfully, people are pointing out, could we also take in caribou data? Could we look at fish data? Indigenous knowledge is like hugely important for understanding freshwater health. Could we do something there? We also talked about, could we build interpretation tools to answer questions like, can I drink the water? Can I eat the fish? These are really big things that people wanted to see. Of course, could we build an app for a handheld device? It just sort of, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, we were spending quite a lot of time looking to other environmental data management systems and trying to understand what was making them successful, and in some cases, what would cause them to fail. And this led us, unfortunately, to what we sort of lovingly refer to as a data hub graveyard. So, there were a lot of, what we found, and this was kind of scary as we were just starting out, but there were a lot of environmental data systems that didn't make it. There were some big ideas, but they didn't ultimately, maybe they got off the ground, but they weren't sustained. So we called all of these organizations and sort of asked them, what did you do, and sort of what happened? And there's a lot of reasons for why these systems didn't ultimately work. But the number one reason that we saw a lot was systems just taking on too much and trying to be sort of everything to everyone. And so this is when we said, okay, we've really got to focus. We had a very lean budget, and so in a lot of ways, this kind of forced focus. I guess here, one of the lessons that we learned here was really just kind of being really careful about what we were going to do and what we weren't going to do. And some of the things that helped us to sort of focus our thinking was thinking about, what were we well positioned to do, uniquely well positioned to do. So one big thing is we were an independent sort of organization and to a large extent quite neutral. So, for example, we could work across jurisdictional boundaries. A provincial or territorial government couldn't. We're not selling anything. We're not competing with data contributors or with data users. We're an established organization with a long history and a really good track record, including in Canada's north. But we're also small. And so we have to be careful about what we take on and whether or not we can sustain it. So we really kind of got very, very clear about what we were going to do and also what we weren't going to do. So, in a nutshell, we were going to provide a place to openly publish water quality data. We're going to provide support to organizations so that they can upload it and format it so that it fits the system. What we're not going to do, we're not going to collect, fund our own water monitoring data. We're not going to analyze and interpret data. And we're not going to fully QA/QC data. So those were some of the big decisions we made in the early days. And I also just want to point out here, you know, what you're seeing on the screen here is what we call sort of the data to policy cycle. And, you know, we always had this in mind. You know, we came at this because we wanted to see that there was data and knowledge to inform policy and action. And we sort of found, you know, the sweet spot of where we could do that, and how we had to work with others for this to really work. So that was a big part of our focusing at that time. So in terms of the lesson, and you're going to see this one again, we really believe that one of the most important things that we have to do, continue to do, is be clear about what we do, and just as clear about what we're not going to do. So I am going to touch on one. This was a really big decision we made early on. As I'm sure many on the call can imagine, there was an interest in sort of tiered access. So the idea that, you know, maybe DataStream could also serve as a tool for within an organization for sharing just within the organization, or maybe this organization wants to share data with another, but not openly. And, you know, all of these sort of questions. We made the decision to go fully open. And this was a really important, I think, you know, kind of juncture in the road for us. What we decided was that we wanted DataStream to be the place where people share the data that they're comfortable sharing. So this is the place for the data that you want the world to see. We weren't going to sort of tread into the world of sort of more private systems, and there are many of them that exist. So, you know, what does open mean to us? DataStream, on DataStream, you know, all the data is free and open for anyone to use. I've mentioned this, but access is not tiered or password protected. All the data on the platform can be downloaded in structured CSV format and accessed through our API. And all data is published under open data licenses that provide clarity around data ownership, attribution, and reuse. And this last piece is really, really important. We were talking to somebody just last week who has a platform, a data platform, and they were saying that they had to strike 20 to 30 one-on-one data sharing agreements with different folks in order to get the data they needed for their platform. And I mean, that's just really, really hard to manage, really, really complex, hard to sustain as well, because you have to sort of monitor that. So, you know, having, you know, a clear path for just sort of publishing data gets you out of having to deal with a lot of sort of those convoluted agreements that take so much time. And I guess the other piece here, and this was, you know, a big learning for us, is that just generally open access is easier. I mean, in our case, we were lucky. We really did want to focus on that data that the world wanted, you know, that people want the world to see. So not getting sort of embroiled in some of this tiered access was a more straightforward solution, especially in the early days. That was really, really important. So DataStream has grown quite a lot since we first launched in the Mackenzie Basin in 2016. So when we launched Mackenzie DataStream, we did that in the Northwest Territories and also held an event on Parliament Hill. And what we learned as we started to get the word out about DataStream is that the challenges that people were experiencing in the Mackenzie Basin were sort of universal. So, you know, people across Canada started to get in touch with us saying, you know, we know there's so much monitoring and research happening in our backyard. We can't get our hands on the data. It's just, you know, we really need a solution like DataStream. Could you do it here? And so we did. And we did this through close collaboration. So, you know, you'll hear us say this a lot, but collaboration has been absolutely fundamental to DataStream's growth. You know, a lot of people say, you know, couldn't you have just changed the bounding boxes and made DataStream national or even international, you know, like why stop there? And I suppose, yes, you could, but we were of the mind that we wanted to build a sense of sort of community around data, really get people engaged. So grow a little bit more slowly and grow through regional partnerships. Because, you know, I'm sitting here in Toronto. What do I know about the Mackenzie Basin and who's out monitoring? What do I know about Atlantic Canada? We had to do that with regional collaborators. And so we did. So we built and launched Atlantic DataStream with an organization called the Atlantic Water Network. Lake Winnipeg DataStream with the Lake Winnipeg Foundation. Great Lakes DataStream we did through sort of a range of collaborations in the region, and I am actually sitting in the Great Lakes Basin. And we're working on Pacific DataStream as well. So we have to date 200 plus organizations contributing data to the platform, 31 million observations, and data from 47,000 locations in Canada. So key takeaway here, we always say open data is a team sport. So, collaboration is key, and it does take time, and it's very much worth it. So in terms of who's sharing data on DataStream, we mentioned we started with community-based monitoring. We've really grown since then. So we have data coming in from Watershed organizations, from academics, from Indigenous governments and organizations. We're getting data in from provincial, territorial, municipal, and federal government programs. And of course, everybody maintains ownership for their data through this process. And here's the breakdown. So this is sort of interesting to see. So you can see here the green, the community-based monitoring data is still sort of the lion's share just within the system. So, this is data sets by contributor type here. And this graph, which I pulled just yesterday, and I apologize for the really, really small print. On the left, it starts in, that's January of 2019, and it ends yesterday. This is just to show you that our data holdings have grown sort of tremendously since we started. And along the way, as I'm sure you can imagine, there have been growing pains, which Lindsay is going to tell you about.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, certainly a lot of growth and some bumps in the road along the way, including, this may resonate with someone, expectation meets reality. We live in a time where we're increasingly looking to technologies to help us solve some of the big challenges like climate change, adaptation, sustainable development. There's a lot of buzzwords flying around, AI and machine learning, digital twins. But the reality is these systems really they need a lot of data, and they need good data and organized data. And when it comes to water data, especially water quality data, if you work in that realm, oftentimes what we're dealing with looks a lot more like the picture on the right. And so as we were growing and working with an increasing variety of groups who all store their data in different formats and have different storage processes for it, this was a challenge that we were met with, is like, how can we bring all this data together in a consistent format and accommodate the diversity of programs that we're working with. In the North, folks are particularly concerned about impacts of the oil sands. And then as we moved into Atlantic Canada and the prairies, we saw more groups monitoring to look at impacts of agriculture. So looking at things like pesticides and nutrients. So we really needed to land on something that could help us accommodate all that data in a scientifically robust way. And so we turned to the WQX, standard for the exchange of water quality data, which was developed by the US EPA and the USGS, sorry. And actually this happened not I would say probably within my first year at the foundation and working on DataStream. And I would say it was probably one of the hardest, but also one of the most important sort of game-changing pivots that we had to make was adopting a kind of standard that could accommodate the data from all these different programs. And it's not easy. Like WQX isn't necessarily a straightforward standard or system, but that's because water quality data is complex. There was a study done in the US that looked at 100 years worth of water quality data, nutrient data in particular, and they found that over half of it couldn't be reused because of missing or ambiguous information. And that was valued at $12 billion US. So it is a real challenge. And WQX helps solve many of the ambiguities around how water quality data is reported and shared. So this was a huge win, I think, for us to be able to bring all the data sets with the groups that we're working with, all the data on DataStream into the standardized format. So it's also aligned with data in the US as well. And I mean, I think a few shout outs are in order here. One, to the US EPA, they were wonderful to work with as we navigated this process. We jumped on many calls with them. It seemed like every time we had a hurdle or had, were challenged by different aspects of data and how to do it, they were always there to jump on a call, had already oftentimes, had workshops about it and brought experts together and had done a lot of thinking on this that we really leaned on and appreciated. The other is the Internet of Water. We actually heard of WQX through an Internet of Water event, funnily enough, back in Detroit some time ago. And then not least our early data contributors. We're eternally grateful for them for sticking with us through this sort of what was really like a pretty sort of awkward teenage phase in our development, and we really are much stronger for it, but it was a bit of work to retroactively go back and look at that data and say, how do we bring it into WQX? So another big game changer for us has been connecting with other data systems through automated integrations. And that includes both data coming in. So as you saw in that graph, we've seen a lot of growth in the data coming into DataStream, and automated connections with open data portals are an important part of that, especially connecting with open government systems, as well as other data systems that store data in open ways, as well as data coming out, so through our API, which Carolyn mentioned. So really improving data discovery through data catalogs, connecting with data analysis tools. We don't do interpretation, but by being able to be a source for standardized water quality data, that's really important in those kinds of applications as well as others. And so it's really opened up a whole world to us of this sort of idea of like a system of systems and interoperable platforms being able to work together to to provide a better digital ecosystem that supports freshwater stewardship. And, we've had a lot of early successes, but we're still learning. This is a very new area of work for us. And I don't think that our colleagues would argue with us in saying that we're probably still in a phase with some growing pains and learning from those and making a stronger system because of it. Just to provide, though, a couple examples or a few examples of the impacts that we've seen through some of this work, both in terms of the data all being standardized and then being able to deliver it through these automated connections. This threat system here was developed by Greenland Consulting. It's a cumulative assessments tool, and it's being used in the city of Edmonton, among other places, to make water management decisions and guide the research behind those. Looking at cumulative effects brings a much more holistic picture. So they're bringing in a lot of other data types like land use or climate data, but DataStream, with our focus on water quality, is the source for that information, and through this tool is being able to brought together and provide greater insights. So that's one really neat example. There's also the Watershed. WWF put out watershed reports assessing watershed health in Canada. So the first version came out in 2017. And then by the second updated version in 2020, we had our API available. And so that really helped a lot in terms of, they take in like threats, they take in some other data types to assess watershed health, but for the water quality component, saved a huge amount of time and just being able to access that data directly in a clean, consistent format. And also helped to fill some of the data gaps that were identified in the first one. Another example of the data being used comes from Atlantic Canada. So they use the data, this is our regional partner, the Atlantic Water Network. They use the data on DataStream to perform a sufficiency analysis to see where the monitoring gaps are. And the Atlantic region is really unique, and community-based monitoring is really active there. There's over 70 different groups. And so being able to do this kind of assessment was really valuable in seeing, okay, this is where all of this work is happening. Where are the gaps? Where should we be strategically directing resources to fill those gaps so that we can get a more complete picture of what's happening. And then just one last point think, we've talked about the data, I've talked about the technology, but the people are really important too. And I think a really fundamental part of our model is being able to provide good community support and essentially, I mean, we're not selling anything, but like customer support. And so in terms of what that looks like in our approach, we often like to use this image of the duck here. It's like we're doing a lot of work below the surface. Dealing with water quality data isn't always easy, figuring out new integrations. Like there's a lot of work happening, but when people engage with us and the DataStream platform, we want them to be engaging with what you see above the surface, a duck there. So making it easy for people, we never want, the challenges to be a barrier for people using the system. So we put a lot of effort into meeting organizations where they're at and providing the supports needed to get data in order. Being responsive, so making sure we're developing resources and tools that can help people and providing timely support, whether it's one-on-one training or group trainings. Investing in relationships, Carolyn has touched on this. I mean, collaboration has been such a fundamental part of our work. And, we know that sometimes it takes time to build relationships and trust. And so that's something that we certainly invest in. And then just under promise and over deliver has been a pretty important principle in terms of, I think, achieving the success that we have and making sure that we're managing expectations and making sure that people know what they can count on us for and being really clear about that. And so I will, oh, wait, did I miss? Sorry, guys. Carolyn, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back 1 minute because I thought I had a slide here to being clear about what you do and don't do has been really fundamental. And I know Carolyn mentioned we were going to bring this up again. When it comes to connecting with other systems and collaborating with others, this has been so important to enable more effective collaborations and more tangible outcomes when we know what other systems do. We have observed, it can be a challenge in the space between differentiating between sort of what are aspirational goals of a system versus what can be done, today or 10 months from now or 2 years from now. So that kind of clarity from everybody in the space is really helpful to be able to advance things forward. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Carolyn to talk about the road ahead.
Thanks, Lindsay. And we'll be touching on integrations, I think, again here. So yeah, we'll just shift gears here and just talk about what we're looking forward to moving forward. So something that we have not really talked about a whole lot in this presentation so far, but I did want to mention it, is we do a lot of work, kind of outside of the platform and working with data. We also do a lot of work around sort of promoting the use of community-based monitoring data, promoting supports for community-based monitoring. We see community-based monitoring as just such a powerful way of involving people in finding solutions to local challenges. I think this is going to be critical, with rapid sort of environmental change that we're experiencing. People are going to need solutions in their own backyards, and they need to be part of developing those. So community promoting CBM is a really, really big part of our work. We've done a number of things around this, but that includes, for example, convening and saying, okay, well, what does the community-based monitoring community need to be successful in the years to come? We also advocate for open access. So, we really believe that, all publicly funded data should be made publicly accessible. And I think we're in good company. I think a lot of organizations, a lot of people would like to see that happen. And there's lots of efforts to do that, but there's sort of a need for follow through and implementation around making public data publicly accessible. And so there's, I think, a very big opportunity here in Canada. And so for those of you in the US who may not know, Canada has been talking about building a Canada Water Agency. So I think we'll be hearing more about that, I think, any day now. And we know that data could be a focus, is likely a focus of the Canada Water Agency. So I think there'll be a lot of opportunity here. So this is something we're excited about that we'll be, watching closely and involving ourselves in if we can as well. In terms of the platform itself, of course, we're going to continue to grow it. there's lots of opportunity to grow it, and we're trying to keep up. So we'll of course be, we're building Pacific DataStream, as we mentioned. We'll be growing our data holdings, and number of organizations participating in the platform. We'll also be looking at bringing in groundwater quality data. So we're not ready to do that yet, but we're working on it. So we're excited to be moving forward with that. We're also continuously making accessibility improvements. And what I mean by that is it's sort of, we're taking a broad definition of accessibility here. So we're constantly thinking about, how do we make sure data streams accessible in low bandwidth settings, where a lot of our contributors live. We also think about, for example, if you need a screen reader, making sure that DataStream performs for users who may be doing that. And then also around things like, Lindsay, I think, showed that we provide resources like science explainers. So making sure people can understand, why does turbidity matter, and just some basic sort of understanding of water health parameters. What's one other thing I was going to mention here? We're running datathons as well. So we bring people together to kind of assist people with learning how to use the platform. Oh, and in general, the design of DataStream, I mean, I hope that if you go and noodle around on it, you'll find it's relatively easy to use. And we're constantly trying to make it easier and easier. The idea is we want to make it, really, really straightforward to find the data you're looking for quickly. So just continuous improvement there. And so Lindsay talked about integrations and how this is a new area for us. So we're really excited about the idea of like sort of a system of systems approach. What we're seeing more and more is sort of more platforms and sort of envirotech tools kind of specializing. And I think it's in bringing these tools together, bringing a data management tool like ours together with an interpretation tool like Lindsay described. I mean, this is where I think very powerful things can happen. And as we begin to link data, we're going to be able to do things that that are really, really difficult to do now. So this is somewhere where we'll be putting a lot of focus, and we're excited about it. And then finally, and this is really important, is we want to invest in sort of telling the story of the so what, so data is openly available. Like, how are things different because data is open access? And so as DataStream's data holdings have been growing, we've been seeing some neat examples of how data is being used that we wouldn't have necessarily anticipated. So we're going to be, documenting some of these stories and sharing them. So that's somewhere we'll continuously be putting effort. So thank you very much, everyone. If please reach out anytime, follow us on all the social medias. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks so much. I do have a couple of questions. Let's leave this slide up for just a few more minutes in case people want to write down this information, even though it will be in the slides that go out later. And again, just to remind everybody, the video will be posted, the link will be posted to our YouTube page and shared on our website and with you via email. And we'll also email out put the link to the slides as well. But so if everybody has a chance to write this down, if you want it immediately, and we can stop sharing and we can go to the Q&A if you'd like to. Okay, so a couple of questions. The first is, I would love to hear more about how partnerships and data contributors grew over time. Was it organically, or were there strategic planning and targeting of entities for specific partnerships?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it was definitely strategic. We sort of did kind of feel our way along as well. So it's just sort of seeing where the energy's at, and going there. So yeah, we looked for organizations that were well positioned to sort of, help us carry this out, who had a mandate and an interest in seeing data brought together. So, the Atlantic Water Network is a great example. Lindsay mentioned earlier that there's 70 plus community monitoring organizations out east. And, you know, the Atlantic Water Network plays this huge role in helping to network them and provide resources. And so that was a natural, that was a natural fit. The same goes for the Lake Winnipeg Foundation, who are answering some really, really tough questions around eutrophication of Lake Winnipeg, involving communities and getting out to do sort of event-based sampling, which is really, really powerful. So, you know, when the spring freshet happens, they're sort of mobilizing people to go out on the ground and collect data. So they were a natural partner as well. We also, outside of those, our regional collaborators, we've been collaborating with a ton of other organizations. Water Rangers is an example, Water Reporter, you know, it's really looking at like-minded organizations that sort of want to crack this net with us.
So on the same note, how do you communicate the limitations of data sets based on their quality that should impact appropriate uses?
Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I can jump in on that one. So our approach is really to provide people who are accessing the data the information that they need to determine fitness for use. So with the WQX standard, there's a lot of information that accompanies each observation, including analysis methods, analysis date and time. As well as through the data set level metadata, we include information on data collection protocols and contact information if anyone has more questions about the data set. There's a publicly provided email by the data contributor. And I will say, like, our system does do some basic checks on upload to make sure that the required information is there. For example, you know, coordinates, units for an observation or for a measurement. And it will flag things for people, you know, if pH is outside of 0 to 14, or if something has units that don't make sense, we will flag that for people so that they have the opportunity to update it if they want to.
Okay, so I've got one more question really about sort of on the engagement side, a couple on the development side, and then a couple that are more technical. So we have quite a few. Sorry, I think we have plenty of time though. So I saw in your curve, you know, and sort of what you were talking about as sort of an uptick, jump in data holdings and how people are engaging with it. Now you did address this a little bit where you're talking about automation and having the API, but I'm wondering, was it just a technology intervention that you think sort of expedited adoption, or you know, you really hit that adoption curve at some point, right? You can really see that in in what you're showing. Or do you think there was more around, or some of it, was it around engaging about how people think about data, use data, those kinds of things? So there's constantly this conversation, I know, on this side of the border, right? Talking about, you know, the balance between, is there's need to be more technical development, or does there need to be more engagement on behavior change and ideas and thoughts around data? So I just wanted to give you a chance to address that.
I feel like Lindsay and I will both have things to say here. Both things are happening. And I think, it's obviously not one or the other. We've got to be doing both. One of the things Lindsay said is, you know, it's not just about investing in technology, it's about investing in people and relationships and building a culture around open access. So certainly it was really exciting to see. In the first few years, we were having a lot of conversations about like the risks of making data open, and just sort of really addressing those and trying to understand, you know, what people saw as risks around open data. And it did change quite quickly. We saw a shift. People weren't asking those questions anymore. And it's hard to say, from our standpoint, it was hard to tell if, you know, all of a sudden DataStream did become real and people could see how what their data was going to look like online. And I think things are a lot less scary when you can kind of, you see it, versus when we were sort of talking about it. So there was that aspect, but no, like generally speaking, I think everybody on this call has probably felt the cultural sort of shift around open data in recent years. The jump, though, also on the curve there, is also due to investments in technology. So all of a sudden, you know, we're pulling data, in from big systems. So you're going to see huge jumps there. And that was facilitated through integrations. So that was a tech development. I don't know if I missed anything, Lindsay.
No, I think that sums it up well. All the things.
Now shifting to a little bit of the sort of development side, what was the process and work that went into how you selected and worked with the company to develop the platform?
Well, also a good question. So that was a big journey as well. So we developed requirements with, community members, our partner in the government of the Northwest Territories. Through that process, we developed requirements, standard stuff. We, put out an RFP, and essentially, had to select a developer that could get us where we wanted to go. So that was, it feels like eons ago. So we worked with this company for a number of years to build sort of the first iterations of DataStream. And then we did hit a point, I can't remember now, I think it's 3 or 4 years ago, I can't remember, but we hit a point where it made sense for us to bring development in-house. So that's what we did. So we're now doing all DataStream development in-house, and then bringing in advisors and consultants and sometimes external developers, just sort of on an as-needed basis.
I just noticed from my own observations, it's very user-friendly, and just, wondering, I guess you're working with UI UX folks, you're doing usability testing to make sure that it's, and just kind of give you a second to talk about, is that something you're also doing in-house, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so a combination of things. We are engaging some UX people right now. Actually, it'll be on sort of a next phase of the platform. But we were talking about this when Lindsay and I were putting this presentation together. We actually thought this might be kind of a fun lesson learned to share, is that we have a really multidisciplinary team. We have a small team, very multidisciplinary one. We have those of us who are not necessarily super computer savvy like me, and people who don't have patience when things don't work or when things are hard. And so we're directly engaged in this. Yeah, that's Lindsay. Lindsay gets impatient. So we have teammates sort of directly involved in making development decisions who really, we're really prioritizing usability, because we've spent a lot of time as well with contributors in the communities, and we're just like, this is all hard already. We need to make the platform as easy to use as possible. And it's still kind of difficult. There's still things we always want to improve, but the whole thing is hard enough as it is. We want to be an enabler. And I should say on our team as well, when we brought development in-house, quite soon following that, we started to, we have a team now with data science experience and scientists, and it's really a wonderful group. So Lindsay, I don't know if I missed anything on that around how we're approaching.
That was actually kind of, your answer was a great segue to this next question, which is, do you have any integrations in place yet with other repositories, and how would that look and work?
Lindsay, you want to take this one?
Sure. I mean, we have some connections in place with open government portals. And when we're connecting with other systems to bring data in, it looks a little bit different every time, because a lot depends on how that data is stored, structured, and served up on those systems. We've also connected with some larger repositories, like in Canada, we have the Federated, it's called FDR, Federated Data Research Repository, data site, and others, where the metadata is taken over there, so that it improves data discoverability. The data still lives on DataStream, but you're able to access the metadata, find out what data exists, and then go to DataStream to access the actual data sets. So hopefully that answers the question. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Carolyn.
I mean, it actually sort of does come back to, there's a bit of a usability aspect of this too, is what we found is when we're working with, we work with a real range of organizations, from some who may have like zero data management, like they're not working on that, they're out collecting data, they're monitoring focused, to organizations that have built data portals and have some of that infrastructure in place. And so what we're always trying to do is, as Lindsay said earlier, really meet these organizations where they're at. And so what we realized was, there's organizations that have portals already would really like to see that data make its way into DataStream, but we have to make it easy. So they only want to update one portal. They want to update their portal. They don't want to update DataStream. So we've been working to do that, to make it really, really easy for people to get it onto DataStream.
Okay, and we have one last question here, which really shifts gears slightly, but what are some of the remaining gaps that you see in terms of the data available, in terms of contributors, geographic areas, the types of data?
Well, I'll start by just saying that, we're focused on water quality data. We're still, by the way, asked to take on other data types. And it's funny because we think to ourselves, I mean, when we look at the country and all the places that we're working, we really feel we're only scratching the surface still. So there's a lot of great data on DataStream. We know there's a lot of data that's out there that is not on DataStream. So I suppose that answers a part of the question, which is, in terms of what data is out there, we really feel there's a lot of work to do. In terms of where there's gaps, I mean, it's difficult to say. I think honestly, there's gaps all over the place. Like, we don't feel, even, in the Great Lakes, for example, we know that we have just tons of work to do to bring more data online. So there's tons of gaps. Yeah, I don't know, Lindsay, if there's more to say on that. We have our work cut out for us. It's sort of how when I look at the map of the country, I'm like, there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think it's a big part of our approach. It's not just geographic expansion. Carolyn mentioned we're working on a Pacific data stream, but we know we still have work to do in the regions that we already exist in. And I think, much like the sort of software itself, it's like you don't just build it and then it's done. There's continual work to engage people and to make sure that we're bringing the data that's useful for people as well. And historic data is especially challenging because the more you are removed from the people who actually collected it or were involved in the program, the more challenging it can be to answer some of the questions that are pretty important for being able to reuse that data. So that's
actually a good point. And something that, I mean, I'm just curious, how often do you run into, and you may have said this already, how often do you run into situations where people have, say, like a lot of paper data, a lot of data that they need to bring forward and it's not even digitized? And are you giving any guidance on this?
Yeah, it's hard. That's really hard. That picture that Lindsay showed of like the situation for water quality data, there is a lot of data out there that's, probably, still on paper. We heard a story of data being kept in a fireproof box in someone's garage. Like, it's like, there's
super accessible, you mean? That's what you mean? Yeah.
It's safe. But safe-ish. But yeah, we're not really getting involved at this point in data that's in paper form. We've got our work cut out for us in the stuff that's like digital but not organized. So that's hard enough. The next layer is PDF data. There's so much PDF data. And so that's going to be, that's a kettle of fish that we haven't really quite tapped into, but it looks like it could be quite possible with some of the new tools out there for extracting tables from those PDFs. But we haven't even gotten started there. So the answer to your question is no, we haven't really gotten to the paper data yet.
Yeah.
I would say, just on the topic of collaborations, we've been involved in some neat collaborations in Canada. At the University of British Columbia, I believe it is, has a living data project. So that's all about data rescue and pairing sort of student interns with folks that have historic data. And so some of the work through that program related to DataStream, but also, they're looking at all sorts of environmental data sets, does just that, like looking at paper data and getting it transferred. So I think, yeah, just to echo that lesson that we emphasized around collaboration, I think that's how we're going to get some of this done.
I like that term, data rescue. Okay, so I'm just going to put up our information quickly for everybody to see. Our website here, internetofwater.org, and we will be placing the video of this webinar there, as well as emailing that link and the slides to you. You can also follow the Internet of Water on our social media on Twitter at Internet of H2O. And you'll see a survey now on your screen. If you'll give us some feedback we would really appreciate it. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time today. Carolyn and Lindsay, we really appreciate it. It was super informative. I loved seeing the platform that you have, and really appreciate all the good guidance. Lessons learned is something for all of us to think about for sure. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having us. It was fun.
Everybody have a great afternoon.